A pale spectral light filtered through the broken canopy of clouds as Aurora trudged across the vast expanse of sea ice, each deliberate step a small quake that echoed through her heavy bones. The wind knifed across her back, carrying the sharp tang of salt and the whisper of distant danger. She paused at the crest of a frozen ridge, lifting her broad muzzle into the biting air and inhaling the scent of water and prey and something darker, an undercurrent of fear that prickled her fur. Beneath her feet, the ice groaned, ancient fractures radiating out like the lines on her weathered face. But it was the faint chorus of howls drifting over the distances that truly unsettled her heart. Those cries were not the playful yips of cubs exploring first snowdrifts. They were the deep, resonant calls of wolves on the hunt, a pack whose hunger had driven them far from land and into the frozen wasteland where only the hardiest creatures dared to roam. Aurora's gut tightened as she imagined the hungry eyes that tracked her path, the lean bodies weaving silent circles around her hidden den. Her belly, heavy with new life, felt like a fragile vessel beneath her ribcage. No shelter more vital than her own strength, no weapon sharper than her will to protect. Drawing a labored breath, she continued onward, padding over the sleet-glazed ice toward a sheltered hollow carved out beneath an outcrop of wind-polished granite. This would be the birthing place she had prepared in the hush of winter's heart, a shallow bed of snow and discarded pebbles, hidden from view except to eyes that knew where to look. All around, the polar night clung to the land in shades of gunmetal and silver, and the horizon glimmered with the promise of dawn yet to come. Aurora's breath steamed in soft clouds as she circled the hollow, pressing her flank against the snowbank to smooth its curves and reinforce its walls. Each motion was a silent vow. This cub would be born wrapped in her own courage, shielded from the pack's relentless hunger. Behind her, the howl rose again, closer now, a chorus of voices that spoke of unity and cunning and the unbreakable drive to survive. Aurora stiffened, every muscle tensing like coiled steel. She faced the starless sky and answered with a trumpet that rolled through the ice floes like distant thunder, a challenge offered to the unseen hunters lingering beyond the ridge. The howls faltered, then surged in defiant response, as though the wolves recognized in her call the music of a rival strength. Aurora felt a surge of something fierce, primeval, an urgency that quickened her blood and sharpened her senses. Night deepened around her, but Aurora's vigil remained unending. She paced the circumference of the hollow, pausing now and then to lift her head and press her keen ears against the rasp of shifting ice. The wolves waited beyond her glare, shadows in the frozen gloom, and she braced herself to trade every scrap of flesh, every drop of blood, to ensure her cub would know only warmth and the gentle press of her fur. Overhead, a lone aurora borealis shimmered in ghostly greens and purples, dancing across the sky as though heralding the coming struggle. Aurora's eyes reflected that spectral glow as she whispered into the silent night, a mother's prayer that the dawn would find her standing victorious at the threshold of new life. The wolves' voices grew louder as they slipped closer across the ice, their mournful wails weaving a tapestry of menace that tugged at Aurora's nerves. She crouched low at the lip of her snow hollow, breath steaming in plumes that drifted like ghosts before the moonlit ice. Beyond the ridge, pale shapes moved with predatory purpose, slim bodies glinting white against the dark ice, eyes burning with hunger and cunning. Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the swirling shadows. She saw 3 at first, then 6, then nearly a dozen, fanning out in a semicircle that threatened to cut off her escape. Her heavy paws sank into the chill snow as she rose, each deliberate step a drumbeat of warning. The wolves halted, heads lifting as one, ears pricked and muzzles parting to catch her scent. Aurora could taste the acrid edge of fear on the wind, but beneath it she harnessed a deeper current, an iron resolve to protect the life growing within her. She took a slow, defiant breath and bared her teeth, a low growl rolling from her throat like an avalanche. The wolves responded with snarls that echoed through the ice fields, a challenge and a promise of violence. At the edge of the hollow, Aurora planted her front paws wide and arched her back, presenting the largest silhouette she could muster. Her fur bristled in frozen spikes, and the moonlight glinted off her gleaming canine teeth. For a heartbeat, the wolves held their ground. Then, the alpha, a massive gray male with scars crisscrossing his flank, stepped forward. His yellow eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, predator and protector measured each other in silence. Then he lunged. In an explosion of speed, the alpha crossed the gap between them, jaws snapping inches from Aurora's flank. She swung her massive head in a blur of white fur, horns, no, teeth, snaring his neck in a flash of raw power. The wolf yelped and rolled free, claws scraping for purchase, but Aurora advanced again, each movement a study in controlled fury. Behind her, the other wolves closed in, encircling her slender den as they had encircled crucified prey in legends passed down by elders who once roamed on shore. Snow flew in white clouds as Aurora rocked her attackers with crushing blows. One wolf leapt too close and found herself pinned beneath Aurora's massive paw, the ice cracking beneath the pressure, until the wolf whimpered and slithered free, blood staining her flank crimson against the silver world. The pack hesitated at the sight of their wounded comrade, and Aurora seized the moment. She bolted toward the ridge's lee, hoisting herself onto a shelf of ice that sloped upward, her lithe, pregnant belly a banner of defiance. The wolves followed, their curved bodies slipping as they scrambled for high ground. At the crest, Aurora paused, breath heaving, and let out a triumphal bellow that rattled the ice floes. Beneath her, the den lay empty, the cub unhatched but safe in her womb. The wolves skidded to a halt below, uncertain whether to charge the violent storm above or abandon their prey to the howling winds. One by one, they backed away, shadows dissolving into the night, leaving Aurora alone on the ridge. Her chest heaved with icy desperation and fierce pride. She had driven the pack from her chosen sanctuary, and now, despite the wolves' hunger and the ice's treachery, she would return to bring her cub to the world, born beneath the polar sky she had defended with her every breath. Aurora padded back to her snow-cradled hollow under the wind-scoured ridge, each heavy step hissing steam from the frozen crust. The storm had spent its fury, and gentle flurries now drifted like confetti across the flattened ice. Her heart thundered in her chest as she lowered herself into the sheltered cup she had carved, feeling the scarred edges of her own paw prints press against her flank, a silent promise that this place was hers to defend. The cub fluttered in her belly, a tiny heartbeat like a trapped bird, and she pressed her muzzle into the powdery snow to inhale its cool purity, steeling herself for whatever came next. No sooner had she settled than the wolves returned. From the ridge's shadow, shapes materialized, 12 gaunt silhouettes silhouetted against the pale sky, their low heads and patient, slinking gait betraying an intelligence honed on desperation. They fanned out into a semicircle that cut off all retreat, nostrils quivering to catch Aurora's scent, eyes gleaming with the silent calculus of predators. Aurora rose once more, her massive shoulders rippling beneath her snowy pelt, claws scraping in a fierce warning that shook the ice. She let out a roar that rattled the canyon walls, breath billowing in a storm of white, and charged forward, each step a declaration that no den, no cub would be taken from her. The alpha wolf surged to meet her, jaws snapping in a savage arc, and Aurora met him head-on, rooted in snow, the fury of the Arctic pounding through her sinews. Claws met fang in a thunderous collision. Snow exploded in frantic cascades as she spun him off balance, slamming her shoulder into his flank with a force that buckled ribs. Around them, the pack surged, wave after wave of lean bodies, eager to claim the tiny new life sheltered in the hollow. Aurora fought with the precision of a mother cornered, each swing of her paw and slash of her claws calculated to drive them back without overreaching, mindful always of the cub she guarded within. A second wolf darted in from the side, jaws opening in a snapping feast, but Aurora's massive head whipped around in a blur of white, and her teeth clamped around the nape of his neck. She shook him loose with such violent clarity that he yelped and fled, blood spattering across her muzzle in a crimson mosaic. The remaining wolves hesitated, hackles bristling as they recognized the untenable odds of a siege against such ferocity. Aurora lowered her head, muscles quivering with exertion, and let loose a final, earth-shaking bellow that echoed across the floes like an approaching gale. The pack skulked back into the drifting storm clouds, figures melting into the swirling snow until only the wind's mournful howl answered her triumphant roar. Silence reclaimed the ice, broken only by Aurora's ragged breathing and the soft pulse of her cub's life within. She pressed herself into the hollow's embrace, flanks aching with wounds both fresh and old, and nuzzled the snow as though it were her newborn's downy fur. Above her, the moon emerged from behind a ragged veil of cloud, casting a pale beam that illuminated the crushed lupine tracks fading into the night. Aurora closed her eyes, every muscle slackening in exhausted relief, knowing that the fiercest battle had been won. Yet another stood between her and birth, but none so daunting as this, and none she would shrink from when the cub's first breath echoed into the Arctic night. A sudden hush fell over the ice, as Aurora sensed the first stiff tremor of a blizzard brewing beyond the horizon. At first it was no more than a distant tremor in the air, a hollow rumble that rolled across the floe like the breath of some unseen leviathan. Then came the whisper of snowflakes, drifting down in ghostly spirals that danced across her muzzle and dusted her broad back in a veil of white. Beneath her paws, the ice groaned, fissures widening as the wind clawed at the surface, and without hesitation, Aurora turned away from her hollow and charged into the gathering storm, her lungs burning with each heaving breath. Behind her, the wolves, tenacious shadows on the ice, surged forward in anticipation of a renewed assault, but the wind rose to a shrieking gale, and visibility collapsed into a milk-white void. Aurora leaned into the wind's savage gale, pressing her head low to break its force and create a sheltered draft behind her broad frame. With each thunderous stomp of her great paws, she carved a path through the swirling snowdrifts, steered by instinct and the desperate promise of her unborn cub. The wolves faltered as their keen noses were overwhelmed by swirling powder. Their lupine howls turned into confused yips as they struggled to keep sight of her retreating silhouette. Snow whipped across their faces, stinging their eyes and coating their muzzles in frosting so thick they could barely taste her scent. Aurora's silhouette was a mountain of white fur and gleaming tusks etched against the blizzard's heart, and each time she paused to confront a half-blinded wolf, she braced on her hind legs and roared, a deep, resonant challenge that cut through the wind's roar like a beacon. Claws scraped on ice as the wolves recoiled, disoriented by the storm's fury and fearful of the mother bear's unrelenting charge. Aurora used the momentary confusion to herd them farther from her den, pivoting on crushed snow and driving them back toward the fractured ledges where the floe stretched into the endless dark. 3 times the pack rallied for a final thrust, their jaws snapping in the deafening whiteout, but Aurora met each lunge with the full weight of her feral resolve. She swung her massive body in wide arcs, sweeping wolves off their feet and sending them tumbling through waves of drifts. Each fallen wolf staggered to its paws, only to be rooted by Aurora's steady gaze, and each step she took deepened the boundary between her cub's sanctuary and the pack's hunger. Around her, the storm's heart pulsed with wind and flying snow, turning every howl to a formless moan and every shape to a phantom in the storm. At last, the alpha, a proud male whose yellow eyes had once gleamed with victory, stumbled against a ridge of ice, paws slipping on the newly formed glaze. Aurora seized her chance, seized her. With a final, earth-shaking roar, she charged and pinned him against the floe's rising lip, her jaws clamping around his shoulder in a vise of living steel. The alpha yelped and struggled, but the storm swallowed his cries, and when he broke free, he fled, dragging his pack behind him into the freezing gale. Aurora watched them vanish into the swirling horizon, then let out a horn-shattering trumpet that turned even the whistling wind to silence. The world stilled at her call. Snowflakes drifted in lullaby silence, and the bones of the ice beneath her feet no longer groaned. Aurora's chest heaved with the thunder of her pulse as she turned back toward her hollow. The storm had both shielded her and driven off her enemies, and now, in the blizzard's waning breath, she crept to the edge of her den. Beneath the drifted ridge, she saw the shallow cradle of snow she had hand-carved, pressed and molded to shelter her cub from the Arctic night. Aurora lowered herself into the hollow, her side brushing the cool shelter, and pressed her muzzle into the snow, tasting its sparkling purity. In the hush that followed the storm's rage, she lay still, every muscle quivering with relief and fierce pride. Above her, the moon broke free of ragged clouds, silvering the battered flow, and she felt the first stirrings of new life within her. The wolves had tested her strength and found only her unyielding will. Now, as the Arctic night stretched on in crystalline silence, Aurora's every breath was a victory, and every beat of her heart a promise that, whatever trials remained, she would protect her cub beneath this savage sky. ChatGPT сказал: Аурора дышала в рваные штаны, как последние гудки шторма сотрясали ледяной полос, и под ее ребрами она чувствовала новое, острее ритм, маленькое сердцебиение ее cub's, pulsing's urgent demand. She shifted in the hollow, snow compressing beneath her flanks, and a fierce warmth bloomed in her belly. Labor had begun. The wind-whipped snow settled into soft drifts around her, as though the world itself held its breath for the miracle about to unfold. A contraction stole the air from her lungs, and Aurora let out a low, guttural moan that echoed across the silent flow. She braced her great paws on the hollow's rim and pressed her head low against the snow, every tendon straining against the surge of need pulsing through her. Above the ridge, shapes, wolves driven off by her storm-born stand, lingered at the edge of vision, but Aurora paid them no heed. Her only focus was the life within. With each shuddering push, the cub inched closer to the world. Aurora's coat, dusted in frost, shivered as sweat beaded along her back, a testament to her exertion. She shifted position, tail curled against her side, and nuzzled the hollow's floor, clearing away loose snow until only firm ice remained. The cub's tiny cry, a muffled squeak of determination, spilled into the hollow's walls, and Aurora answered with a gentle rumble that vibrated through her bones. You are safe. Finally, with one last earth-shaking heave, Aurora felt the cub slide free. She nudged it with the tip of her wet nose, urging it into the warmth of her fur. The newborn's coat, damp with birth fluids, clung to its flanks in thin sheets. Aurora wrapped her massive body around it, pressing her side into the hollow to shelter it from the wind. The cub's tiny limbs flailed, searching for the promise of a mother's milk, and Aurora guided its shaking muzzle to her swollen teat. The first suckle was weak and uncertain, but as the cub found her warmth and supply, its whimpers softened into contented sighs. Above, the wolves' howls drifted faintly on the breeze, an echo of past threats now rendered powerless by the bond forming in this icy cradle. Aurora exhaled into the starlit night, snowflakes settling on her muzzle like silent blessings, and closed her eyes in exhausted triumph. In the hush that followed, mother and cub drew together in a living quilt of fur and life, and Aurora knew that no storm, no pack of hungry wolves could ever undo the fierce truth of her love and the miracle that had borne new hope beneath the polar night. Aurora rose from the snow-packed hollow, her limbs still heavy with the strain of birthing and the chill of the polar night. The newborn cub nestled at her side, its downy coat wet against her icy flanks as it nursed with unsteady eagerness. Each suckle sent a fresh tremor of relief rippling through her, a promise that life had prevailed despite the wolves' relentless hunger. Above them, the sky began to pale along the eastern horizon, a thin seam of milky light that promised the approach of dawn, and with it, the return of her adversaries. Out on the flattened floe, shapes emerged from the whitening gloom, a dozen wolves, lean bodies low in the snow, eyes locked onto Aurora's den with determined focus. Their fur was crusted with frost. Their breath hung in puffs of mist as they advanced with cautious solidarity, wary now of the mother's furious defense. Aurora planted her massive paws in the edge of the hollow and turned her broad flank toward them, her teeth bared in a snarl that echoed like thunder in the still air. Behind her, the cub's frightened whimpers mingled with her own low growls, a living drumbeat of fear and defiance. The alpha wolf, a tall male with a jagged scar across his muzzle, stepped forward, nostrils quivering as he scented the cub's warm vulnerability. Aurora swung her head in a blur of snow-dusted fur, claws scraping against the ice, and unleashed a bellow so fierce it crackled through the thinning darkness. The wolves recoiled, hackles raised, circling wide as they searched for a flank to exploit. Each time one dared close, Aurora lashed out with a sweeping paw, hooves sending carved gouges into the flow and hurling showers of ice crystals into the pale light. As dawn's first rosy glow flushed the sky, Aurora felt the cub's small body pressed tight against her, its heartbeat a frantic echo beneath her ribs. She met the alpha's yellow gaze without flinching, sharing the unspoken truth that any wound she bore was nothing compared to the pain of loss. The alpha snarled and lunged, a final, desperate thrust, but Aurora met him head-on, her massive shoulders absorbing the impact as she drove him backward into the chaotic pack. One by one, the wolves found their ranks broken by her indomitable stand, paws skidding on the slick ice as Aurora's roaring challenge fractured their resolve. When the sun rose fully, gilding the ice in flecks of rose and gold, the alpha let out a single grudging yelp and turned his pack away. They melted back into the drifting haze, bodies disappearing like dark stains on the endless white. Aurora remained motionless until the last shadow vanished beyond the ridge, then exhaled a long, shuddering breath. She sank into the hollow beside her cub, pressing her flank against its slender form and nuzzling it with exhausted tenderness. Above them, the Arctic day began in crystal clarity, and Aurora, fierce guardian of her newborn, knew that nothing, not hunger, not cold, not wolves, could ever force her to abandon the fragile spark of life she had fought so fiercely to protect. The ice shifted and groaned beneath Aurora's great paws as she rose from the shelter of her den. The newborn cub curled against her warm flank, eyes half closed in post-birth drowsiness. Sunlight, pale and trembling, seeped across the flow, gilding every ridge and crack in a soft rose hue. Aurora lifted her muzzle toward the dim glow, tasting the promise of safety in the thawing air. Behind her, the cub tested its legs for the first time, swaying like a sapling in a summer breeze, then righting itself against her side with instinctive determination. Together they set out across the shimmering sea ice, Aurora's massive form a living bulwark against the lingering chill of the polar night and the memory of prowling wolves. Each step she took was deliberate and sure, her claws clicking a steady rhythm on the frost-slick ice, while the cub's tentative trot followed in careful echo. The world around them was hushed, broken only by the soft sigh of wind through fractured floes and the distant call of gulls riding the warming currents. Every so often Aurora paused, bending low to nuzzle the cub's damp fur, reassuring it with a soft rumble that resonated like the heartbeat of the north itself. They traversed a narrow lead in the ice, where dark water gleamed beneath broken slabs, and Aurora knelt to nudge the cub across the slick expanse, teaching it to bend its legs and trust the solid crust. On the far side lay a stretch of newly formed ice, clear as glass, where the cub slipped and slid before catching balance on its fourth try, bright eyes wide with triumph. Aurora trumpeted softly at each success, a joyous note that echoed across the frozen plain and seemed to draw the sky closer, pulling warmth into the pale dawn. As they approached a ridge of pressure ridges, ice thrust up like the spines of sleeping whales, Aurora sensed movement in the haze. A group of ringed seals hauled out on a distant floe. Their dark shapes were cautious, flippers tucked beneath their bodies as they watched mother and cub with curious eyes. Aurora paused, breath steaming in the cold air, and inclined her head toward the cub, signaling caution and teaching respect for potential prey. The cub stood stock still, instincts awakened, and Aurora pressed forward at a measured pace, allowing the seals time to slip into the water. She let out a low, gentle chirrup of contentment as they vanished beneath the dark surface, imparting the lesson that survival depended as much on respect as on strength. Beyond the seals lay the open channel that led toward the great pack of sea ice, where fish and crustaceans stirred beneath the surface. Aurora's pace quickened, each stride carrying her and her cub closer to the safety of open water and the promise of nourishment. The cub's small form scampered at her side, tail flicking with excitement as the scent of brine mingled with the crisp aroma of melting ice. Then, with a graceful leap befitting a much older bear, Aurora plunged into the cold channel, flippers paddling with effortless power. The cub hesitated only a moment before following her mother's form into the frigid embrace, flippers stroking in clumsy synchronization until they broke through to the opposite bank, coats dripping in glittering rivulets. On the far shore, Aurora halted among a grove of wind-sculpted pressure ridges that sheltered pockets of open water like secret pools. She lowered herself into the shallows, teaching the cub to lap at the salty water and to taste the first icy chill as a gift of life. Then, with a powerful thrust of her forelimbs, she led the way onto the main pack, where distant belugas and narwhals plumed in the morning mist. Together, mother and cub ventured into the expanse, Aurora's keen eyes scanning the horizon for seals and fish, her cub trailing in her wake, its confidence blossoming beneath her vigilant gaze. As the sun rose fully, burning away the last shadows of night, Aurora carried her cub through a world renewed by light. Each breath was a testament to the fierce battle she had fought, a battle not for herself, but for the fragile heartbeat she had brought into the world. And as they dove into the shimmering waters, side by side, mother and cub slipped into a dance of survival that would carry them through the long Arctic summer, bound forever by the courage and love that had triumphed against the wolves and the storm beneath the polar sky.